Welcome, and thank you for coming to our trade session on Provence Rosé. Are they all the same? Let's answer that question together today. I'm Catherine Bouguet, a founder and head of education at the Napa Valley Wine Academy, and we're working with Côtes de Provence with the CIVP to present this session. A big warm thank you to the CIVP for providing this presentation and the wines that we're tasting today. So as trade, you've seen, right, either the sales numbers, the reports, the news. Rosé continues to be an important style in the marketplace. Provence Rosé is a benchmark. When producers around the world produce a pale-colored rosé, they call it Provence style. However, color is only one of the factors of Provence Rosé that we'll discuss today. Look, for any history buffs out there, there's all of these dates here, but I really want to point out two. First of all, the 600 BC. Provence is France's first vineyard. And then while there's really interesting dates on the qualitative shift to rosé in the 70s, and then the creation of PDOs, right, quality designations, the next date that I want to point out is this 1999. And this is the creation of the Centre de Rosé. And the Centre de Rosé is the world's only R&D center strictly for rosé, and it was established in Provence. And the reason I find this is important for trade is because this is the reason why your customers know that they can consistently get a quality rosé when you sell them a bottle of Vin de Provence wines. I think this is very important. And here's why. Here's what happened. You know, all of the members of the Centre, they went ahead and decided, hey, let's establish what constitutes, what are the characteristics of a top quality rosé wine? And then they worked back to front. So they worked from the vineyard all the way up to every single meticulous step, all the way through to bottling and maturation, and created a textbook, of processes to follow so that everyone in the region could raise the quality of their wines. Now, you'd think that's a feat. It took them 25 plus years for all of the experimentation, all of the work that they did. However, the real trick came in trying to get 500 plus producers to all accept this regimen, right? To accept these steps in order to be known as the number one rosé producing region. Incredibly, they did. So this structure of quality happens around the Vin de Provence PDOs of, you can see here over to the left, the Côtes de Aix-en-Provence, then Côtes de Terroir en Provence in the green, and then off to the east and the south, we've got the Côtes de Provence. Here, it's important to note that Provence is the number one region in France for PDO wines. 43% of the PDO wines, meaning your quality wines made in France, are made in Provence. These are very, very big numbers. Like 89% of the wine made is rosé. This is rosé country. Yes, there's a small percentage of red made. White has increased slightly to 6%, but 89% is rosé and intentional rosé. These are wines made from vineyard to bottle, rosé style. So let's start to dive in to the PDOs, and let's start to answer that initial question. Are all Provence rosés the same? Let's go ahead and visit the Côtes de Aix-en-Provence first. And I'll point out a few things. If you'd like to go ahead and start to taste your wine number one, please do. We're about to. But I do want to point out a few things. First of all, the Côtes de Aix-en-Provence, right, this western area, high Mediterranean sun, as you would expect in a Mediterranean climate, high sun hours, low rain. The Mistral's fierce here, right? The winds come down and up, across. So extreme Mistral winds here. And this is limestone Provence. This is also, Cézanne's, famous paintings were inspired from the landscape here. I want to point out, though, here, you're going to see that you've got vineyards along the coast, but then you also have vineyards inland, and there's elevation there, right? We've got mountains. We've got a lot of landscape that I'll explain going on here. But so you have really wines that are produced along the coast where it's warmer. We can actually expect a different expression in the glass. We can expect some warmth, some roundness. Whereas the wines that are inland, and especially at elevation, we might expect more acidity, right? Brightness, that, a really zing of, purity of fruit. So different expressions, even just looking at this map here, we can expect. So of course that calcareous soil is going to be important here. It's just great for grape growing. When it rains, it pours, and you will retain some of that water and drain off the excess water. And calcareous soils are also just great for maintaining acidity in the wine, just because they inhibit the, uptake of acid-reducing potassium, if we get geeky for a second. But anyway, I think that's important for this area and things that are influencing the Côtes Aix-en-Provence. So when you're inland, this is another point, when you're planting more inland also, your grapes ripen later. There's sometimes a longer time for development, so you're going to get different flavor characteristics in the wine. The grapes are picked later. So just different things to keep in mind as we taste wine number one. We happen to have a wine, that is from a higher elevation in the Côtes Aix-en-Provence. So you can see here on the screen that we have a higher percentage of Grenache. Grenache, of course, comes in with that red fruit, that great roundness, that mouthfeel. Syrah can give some nice darker fruits, a little structure to the wine. Of course, color. Cinsault, known for its bouquet, for its freshness and finesse. So great, great, great to use in rosé. But let's go ahead and taste this, thinking about the place of this wine, right? The fact that it is the Côtes Aix-en-Provence. So, and of course, the wine is appropriately named Aix. One of the things I'd love to hear, from folks, are you getting that intensity on the nose? Some great aromatic intensity. Beautiful, sort of bright, right? Bright, fresh strawberry, cherry, these beautiful red fruits. And almost like a, I know mineral's a hot topic word, but sort of that mineral, that crushed rock element, that earthy element here as an undertone. Beautiful citrus. Anyway, let's go ahead and taste the wine. Let's go ahead and put it on our palate if you haven't already. There's a nice silky texture here that really works, helps balance that bright freshness. So I think that signature in this wine is that incredible acidity, that beautiful brightness. But the wines of the Vin de Provence wines are known, part of sort of, I like to joke around and call it the elevator speech, the little, concise description that you give of Vin de Provence, is usually that it has a richness and texture, and also this beautiful acidity, and it finishes beautifully fresh. And I find that here. But of course, distinguishing this one is that great, great freshness, zesty, liveliness. And I think there's a touch, and if you're sensing, I'm sure you are, that bit of that texture, that feeling of the Syrah coming in. So really a wine that's giving you sort of everything, giving you that nice silky texture, giving you that bright, fresh, acidity, and then coming in with a little bit of structure. We'll be, keep your notes and thoughts on this wine, because we'll be, talking about the other wines and sort of comparing them a little bit. Before we head off to this wine, though, look at that beautiful color, that sort of peach, color. It's fun to be able to talk about something different than, the lemon, ruby. And so here we're talking about colors like lychee and peach and, pomelo. So just different colors to showcase here. And in fact, the Centre de Rosé that I mentioned, they also came up with a color chart, which I'll share later. Anyway, so this beautiful wine that is showcasing the Côtes de Aix-en-Provence. So we did provide some slides with, that you can geek out on later if you'd like to. We will be sending this presentation around. But really what I want to point out here, the highlight here, because our customers, we see, right, from the reports, they're interested in organics, right, sustainability. And 25% of the land here is organic. And 59% is HEV. If you're not familiar with HEV, it's, the high environmental value. And that is really, it focuses on soil life and that interaction with the agroforest. So really a high environmental value. It's not just a clever name. So anyway, pointing that out, and I think that this is, again, important today to our customers and something to point out. In fact, let's talk. We've talked lightly about the landscape, right? With the Côtes de Aix-en-Provence, and we have some vineyard that is along the coast, and then we have some inland vineyard. And I think we really should talk a little bit about the terroir here, because Provence, these Vins de Provence wines are from really an extreme, it's a kaleidoscope of terroirs. And you've got some extreme terrain here. There are massive, there's soaring limestone ridges, tremendous rock jutting out of the earth. And all of this, the vines are placed, live amongst all of this, as well as around lavender fields, olive and almond groves. I mean, this, they are, here, I'll tell a story. Ray O'Connor, master of wine, who created these materials, he talked about visiting Provence, and he steps out of the car because the landscape is just so gorgeous. Yet, what he finds when he steps out, besides the beautiful scenery, is that he's got bees buzzing around him. He's got butterflies, there's birds, there's the biodiversity and the vibrant life that is happening, here, is, I think, really important to point out. This is not a sea of vines. Whereas I think a lot of people think of Provence, swimming pools, yachts, really, behind the scene, it's this beautiful, vibrant, and, alive terroir. And I think that's important to realize when it comes to thinking about where these wines come from. So because we're talking about sort of this abundant life, this vibrant life, I think it's important to talk about that organics and HEV, and we'll mention, percentages for the three major PDOs. But I think what's really important here is that while the number is high now, by 2030, it will be 100%. And I think that's their dedication to protecting this land. Again, not an ocean of vines. So let's go ahead and journey over to the Côtes de Terroir in Provence, where the extreme landscape is exemplified. I think here, this region, this PDO, is recognized for its unspoiled nature. I mean, it's called Provence Verte, right? Green Provence. And here, the region is distinguished, by these mountainous reliefs, that peak at 3,300 feet. I mean, the vineyards can be planted at over 1,600 feet. I mean, this is, the maritime influence is blocked here. You're going to have continental influences here. Hot summers, harsh winters, and there's actually high rain. So just things that, work together in this area to make it unique. But all of this elevation, this extremeness, we're going to expect, more freshness, bright acidity in these wines, a really, purity of fruit, from this mountain terrain. So let's go ahead and taste the next wine. So in your glass, you have the Cala, and here we are. We're at altitude, we're at elevation. We've got a blend of Grenache. We've got Syrah and Roll. Roll is Italy's Vermentino, which can add great citrus, pear, fennel, some almond. So it can add some extra aromas to the wine. And I think, white grapes in small percentages are allowed. And I think Roll is just one of those ones that you'll see just because it adds to the beautiful bouquet and adds that liveliness to the wine. You can see here that we have some batonnage, we have some lees stirring, and a little bit of barrel aging. So let's go ahead and taste this wine number 2, and our Domaine La Cala Prestige. Did you notice this color? Beautiful, sort of, they call this color mother of pearl in English. And I think that's such a beautiful color. So very, very pale. A white floral nose, beautiful floral here. Some garrigue, right? We've got some of that, thyme and rosemary, that aromatic brush. But there's really a bit of like either a toastiness or creaminess on the nose. Let's go ahead. We'll put it on the palate and see if we get any of that extra creaminess on the palate. But then there's citrus pear. Okay, I'll stop smelling. There's lots to smell here, and go ahead and put it on the palate. I'm sensing the acidity now. Beautiful juicy acidity. Beautiful juicy acidity showing, the origins of where this wine is from. Yet there's some structure here. I can feel sort of the texture, some tannic structure here. And of course, there is that texture. There is that roundness of the texture that could be from this high percentage of Grenache. It could come in from, the winemaking, from that, lee stirring. So that beautiful richness. And in fact, it is part of that signature style of, the Vin de Provence, where you've got that roundness, yet freshness. And I think this shows that this as well. This wine shows that sort of style, but a slight different expression of that style, right? You can feel that freshness, those different aromas and flavors that we mentioned. So I think we're already starting to answer that question, even with wine number 2. Are all Provence rosés the same? But we'll continue on. Let's go ahead. And, we provide a lot of these, facts here. You can go through and parse through them post, webinar if you'd like. But what I really want to point out here is just, again, because it's important to our customers. It's important to your customers, the organics, right? The sustainability. And it is very high here. I mean, look at this, 44% certified organic and 56% HEV. I mean, this is incredible. And if you're thinking, hey, wait a minute, but you mentioned there was high rain. There's good amount of rain here. So how can that be? Generally, when you have a wetter climate, it's hard, right, not to use those chemical, chemical things to fix the vineyard against fungal disease. But we haven't talked much about the winds yet, and that's going to be important here. First of all, the soil. We've got limestone soils, right, which are great at retaining, some water, draining off excess water, keeping acidity in the wines. We also have schist soils that we'll be talking about. You find those more in the east and the south, and those are great for, the fractured structure. The vines dig down deep for water. I think that what really is a signature here in this area, which of course it shares with the Rhone, is the winds. But the winds are an element where there's not just one wind, there's 32 different winds. And these winds act as a natural hair dryer, blowing out the humidity and the wet, right? Minimizing that risk of fungal disease and pests. So this is an important element that the growers here, that the wine producers, that they live with. In fact, they know these winds so well. I mean, a storm blows through and they know in their area which wind to expect next, how long it will last. They live, these farmers hand down this information generation to generation, where the vineyards are passed down, and they share this information. They know, they live with this terroir, they live with these winds and understand them and harness the power of them to help them keep the fungal diseases and pests off of the vines. Now, of course, you have the other influences, the high sun hours, you've got the Mediterranean Sea and sea breezes that are influencing. You've got slopes. We've been talking about, some of the extreme terroir. So you have lots of influences going on, but I just think that the winds are something particular to here. And in fact, a lot of people think of them as Mistral, but here it's 32 different winds. So the producers, they know, the growers, they know to go ahead and work with their land. In fact, they will plant the vines in the direction of the wind, right, to minimize harm to the vines. They'll also create terracing. They have terraces here that they call restonque, and they're planting, the vines perpendicular, to these restonque. And one of the great benefits of that is against soil erosion, but it also has other benefits. And so again, living and working their land because they understand it and they know it. Since we're talking about the land, let's go ahead and talk about the key grape varieties. Of course, there's the big three, which I'll share about in a minute. I'm sure, most, if not all of you, know the characteristics of those grapes. But you could see that there's numerous grapes used. These wines are blends. Right? The Vin de Provence wines are blends. The Mourvèdre will come in with its deeper color. Counoise is known for fruity, floral, and spice. Tiberin is a native grape variety, really structured around the Var. And the Tiberin comes in with this beautiful bouquet and freshness, finesse. You can see that the blends include Cabernet Sauvignon and Carignan sometimes, right? Which can come in like with Syrah with some structure and color. You've got some rarer grapes here. There's some pink skin grapes here. And one of these grapes is also a crossing of Grenache Noir and Malbec, the Caladoc. So you have different grape varieties here that I think are of interest. And the Centre de Rosé, right, that research and development center, they didn't stop once they created, hey, here's all the steps for creating this, high quality, rosé, so that we are the number one producing rosé region. They are still looking forward, and they're looking at climate change. And there's other grapes here you can see from southern Italy. You see these grape varieties from Greece here. They looked at these regions that are hot and dry, and what are they using? I mean, they are experimenting. They've done experiments with over 250 different grape varieties and experiments. It's pretty incredible that the work that they're doing for there. But let's go to the big three grapes, and I'll just say this quickly since I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with this. But Grenache usually comes in with its beautiful red fruits, that roundness, that mouth feel, and when they age, they take on this beautiful spice. The Sancerre, just fresh and delicate, right? That beautiful fresh bouquet. It really does well. It adds a brightness and freshness into the wine. So Sancerre is a great grape for rosé. Syrah, of course, comes in with its black fruits and comes in with some structure. And so we can see this structure in some of the wines of Provence. And of course, here the ageability of Syrah is an important feature. So the top three grape varieties. But let's continue our journey through the Vin de Provence, PDOs, and let's go on to the Côtes de Provence, right? So now here we're in this peach-colored area, here, and you can see that a lot of it, falls along the coast. And so you have a lot of coastal wines, yet look at all that inland, and extreme landscapes continue here. We're going to see a little more schist over here because it's to the east and the south. And so just that bedrock, a little bit different in a lot of the wines. So beautiful, right? Côtes de Provence. You just want to sort of stare at this picture and sip the wines, which you can do when you have the taped version if you'd like. But let's go ahead to wine number 3. Let's go to wine number 3 and taste the sort of the Côtes de Provence. What you go ahead and taste, and I'll just sort of explain a few things. There's some elevation to this wine. You've got Grenache, you can see here, Sanso, Syrah, that roll, right? Remember, that's the Italian Vermentino that comes in with citrus, pear, almond, fennel. So again, giving this nice aromatic complexity to the wines. Let's go ahead and taste. So this is our Chateau La Mascaron. Beautiful peach, what they call pêche color. On the nose for me, there's all this lovely citrus, lemon, tangerine, grapefruit, some white floral. I wish I could hear you to hear what you're getting. And some delicate red fruits, beautiful, some red fruits here. Let's go ahead and taste this wine. Bright, vibrant acidity here, beautiful acidity. Yet we still have this beautiful texture, the silkiness to the wine. I think when we talk about a vin de Provence and that sort of elevator speech, that snapshot, you have, right? Well, of course you have it. The wine's dry, pale in color, but you've got this intensity, this aromatic intensity and complexity, to consider. And I think that a lot of our customers don't understand the relationship, here between the color and the intensity, right? You can have this pale color that belies that then just explodes with this beautiful intensity on the nose and on the palate. And then the wines of, Vin de Provence come in with this beautiful round texture. And on top of that, it's sort of, it is sort of enveloped in this freshness that the wines finish beautifully, fresh and bright. So I think that's sort of a signature here, but I'm really, I'm seeing different sort of aroma, combinations, different expressions, of the fruit. So beautiful sort of differences in what we're finding. So the citrus here was more dominant for me in the initial sort of smell of the wine, versus, the previous wine. I've got this beautiful floral at first, and that garrigue. And of course, wine number 1 was so intense with its, bright red fruits that came out first to me. So I think different expressions, of the wines here. I think we're starting to answer our initial question, are all wines of Provence, are all Provence rosés the same? I think we're already starting to see that they're not, but let's continue. So let's move on ahead, but please keep enjoying this wine. Lots of geeky facts, unless you'd love to jump in, but you can see here, 21% of the land is certified organic, 30% HEV. So, again, an attention that is a focus for the region, a priority to become 100% by 2030. So I think that's important here. More facts for you to parse through if you'd like to on the Côtes de Provence. Like we said, this is a larger area. It's diverse and there's a lot going on. Lots for you to explore. One thing I would love to add is, if I can have your attention a little bit longer against the rest of our wines here. But you and your customers may see a further designation. Some of you, I'm sure, have seen these and know of these, but there's further designations within the Côtes de Provence, certain areas, terroirs that have shown quality. In fact, these designations are official. They come with stricter regulations. And there are 5 of them right now. The first one here, the Côtes de Provence Saint-Victoire, actually, you may have seen in the news, has become a cru. So you'll start to see these changes develop. It's in the final stages now, and will be elevated to a cru. But each of these, really, the main point to walk away with today is just that when you see these on the label, they mean something. There's a uniqueness to these wines. And so they're all Côte de Provence, then the Saint Victoire, Fréjus, Lalande, Pierrefonds, and the Notre Dame des Anges. So each of these, now we won't go through all of the 5 of these today, but I do want to point out just what these differences can mean. So let's just go ahead and focus in on 2 of these, so that we can talk about why it matters, this designation and what it's showing. You can see that they're spread throughout the Côte de Provence. They're complementary geographic denominations. And so each of them, like I said, is going to express the wines differently. So here you have a map where they actually show them. You can see, let's just take a look at 2 of them. You can see here, all of that sort of light tan area is the Côte de Provence, and you can see the Côte de Provence Saint-Victoire over to the west. So not the west of the entire region, but here just to the west of the Côte de Varois en Provence. So this area here, Saint-Victoire, which is a massive mountain in the area. So the Montagne Sainte-Victoire. And then the other one I'd like to point out, Lalande, down here, it's down in the southeast. And so this area is along the coast. And I think these 2 are great just to point out what the differences can be. You see here the Côte de Provence Saint-Victoire here, which is one of these. I mean, just the rocky ridge here. Look at the beauty, of this limestone ridge. Maritime influence is blocked here, slightly. You still can feel the fierceness, but it's blocked to some extent, and enough so that you have continental influences here. So that you're going to have a different environment than other areas of the Côte de Provence, which should lead to differences in the wine, which should express themselves differently in the wines. But we expect here, beautiful, just direct acidity, beautiful brightness in the wines, that piercing fruit purity here. So let's go ahead and take wine number 4. And our wine number 4, is from the Côte de Provence Saint-Victoire. So we've got that high altitude. We're blending Cinsault, Grenache, Syrah. We've got Roll again. Just a reminder, that's Italy's Vermentino. Only small percentages of the white grapes can be blended in, but we're dealing with sort of the big 3 grapes here. So let's go ahead and taste this wine. So, pas du moins. Beautiful, but I'm smelling it, but then I'm also like eyeing this beautiful, I think this is a beautiful lychee color. Again, it's really fun to talk about the colors of these wines. Okay, but again, aromatic intensity, beautiful red fruits. And you know what we have here? Are you smelling that passion fruit, the beautiful tropical island fruits? Passion fruit, mango. So again, a different expression for the vins of Vin de Provence. Let's go ahead and put this wine on our palate. Assessing the acidity. I continue to salivate. This is some high acidity, some beautiful acidity in this wine. But do you feel that there's the balance of suppleness? There's that beautiful suppleness that balances out that acidity on the palate when you concentrate on it. Feel that. I think you need to peel back the curtain or push aside, take off your acidity hat, and you can really feel that there's still some weight to this wine. But of course, its signature is that expression, of that vibrant acidity. So beautifully shown here. So we've talked quite a bit about the Côtes de Provence, Saint Victoire, DGC. And just as a comparison, let's talk very briefly about one of the other DGCs, Lalande. You'll see it there in the southeast. This area, and look at this beautiful photo, right? Seaside, the vines are just looking at the sea. But here it's warmer, and we can expect more ripeness and more richness, roundness in the wines that are found in Lalande. So while we're not tasting one today, just know that there are big differences between the wines of these DGCs if anybody wants to explore them. But let's go ahead and continue on our explanation of the Côtes de Provence. We have another wine here where we have 44% Cinsault, 33 Syrah, 23 Grenache. And in this wine here, right, from Chateau de la Clapière, we have a Cru Classé labeling. Let's explore for a minute what that means. So the Cru Classé, this was done in 1955 in Provence, and it mirrors Bordeaux. So it is for estates, and I think there's something like 18 estates that has the Cru Classé label. So it has that classification. However, that new cru, the Saint Victoire becoming a cru, that's about the terroir. So a much different discussion. So the two do exist, and of course that Saint Côte de Provence Saint Victoire is the very first cru from Provence. But anyway, the classification with the Cru Classé is about the estate, and the cru is something that is about the terroir. So just know that. So this estate has some standing. But let's go to the wine and let's look for that signature Côte de Provence taste. So go ahead and look at the beautiful color. It's beautiful melon color here. On the nose, lots of bright red fruits, red currant, red cherry, lovely red fruit with an undertone of lemon citrus. So beautiful. Beautiful aromas. Let's go ahead and put it on the palate. I'm feeling that beautiful suppleness that we generally find in these wines, but this time we also have a little bit of grip. We have some tannin, some of that texture from tannin here. So we've got some structure to this wine. And we can, of course, expect that, especially from the Syrah on this list. So another lovely example of a Côte de Provence wine. So we're going to go back to Côte de Provence, La Saint Victoire. Let's go back there because this is the beautiful limestone ridges for our final wine. And I think that, this is because it's, becoming a cru. I think that this is a great region for you a great BGC for you to know about. You'll see it on a label and know that you can expect some of that bright acidity, that purity, that piercing, beautiful purity of fruit that comes, from elevation, from altitude. So let's go ahead and take wine number 6, our pure rosé from the south side of the Saint Victoire Mountain. And again, this is a big limestone mountain. Mont Saint Victoire is the name of it. So you can see here that we're dealing with many different grape varieties, a good percentage of Grenache. We have Syrah, Cinsault, our usual group, but then there's 8% of a number of other grapes, our roll, and we're seeing Carignan and Cabernet Sauvignon here, right? Both of them coming in with higher tannins, as well as the Mourvèdre that's listed here. So, of course, that's not showing in the color of the wine, but let's see what we get on the palate and the nose, the palate and the nose. First of all, I like to look at the color. It's this beautiful peach color. Here, though, I'm getting so much, some white fruits. There's beautiful sort of peach, um, like I'm smelling a peach orchard, like I'm in the middle of the orchard. Beautiful peach and pear. Now the red fruit's coming in, sort of red cherry fruit. And there's even a touch of sort of garrigue. There's touch of, some of that aromatic herb in here, giving it some great complexity. So beautiful, beautiful nose going on. Let's see on the palate. Again, a beautiful suppleness, but we've got this juicy, fresh acidity here. I think, again, it's showing, the terroir. It's showing its elevation, really juicy, still juicing here. I think that this is a beautiful expression of the Saint Victoire DGC. Okay, I hope you've been enjoying these wines. Let's talk a little bit about, we've been talking about these wines and not really diving into the winemaking portion much. And we don't need to dive deep. I know that you're familiar with the different techniques being in the trade. But what I think is interesting here is these families, these growers, they've been passing down, the know-how, not only to the growers in the vineyard, but also to the producers and families there. So the winemaking know-how, that savoir-faire, is really something also passed down and incorporated into the Vin de Provence wines. And it's, we've talked before about how they work with the wind. They harness the wind. They work, they plant on the restanque, perpendicular to the slope. So they're working with their land, but they also know that, hey, what do we need to do to produce this top quality rosé wines? And so, they're picking at night or in the early morning to keep the fruit cool. You want that because at warmer temperatures, chemical reactions happen faster. So keep everything cool. Comes to the cellar, you want to keep oxygen to a minimum, maintain that purity of fruit. So every step of the way, you have to be meticulous in the cellar. And of course, you need to be doing the winemaking is generally direct pressing and or short maceration for 2 to say 20 hours. With the direct pressing, you need to be very careful, right? You can't press too aggressively because you want to keep that purity, those aromatics. You don't want to be adding in you don't want to be adding any bitterness that could come from pressing too deeply. Now, I know that you've heard these things before, but I just want to sum up with the point that this know-how is now incorporated as part of the culture of the winemaking here, and so it is something, again, that's passed down, and they're utilizing not only what they learned through the Centre de Rosé, right, the Research and Development Center, but they've been making wine. I mean, we saw the history and how far back they were making wine. I mean, originally the wines were more white than rosé, but we saw that qualitative rise in rosé happening in the 1970s. So they've come a long way with their progression in winemaking, and particularly in rosé winemaking. So let's talk about enjoying wine with the meal. I think this is something that your customers may ask, hey, what should I have with this wine? And I think that is the easiest answer you can give with when it comes to the Vin de Provence, because these wines really do go with everything. Here, the curious thing is you've got, that olive branch, between should we have a white or a red with dinner? Well, you've got components of both, right? You've got those fresh red fruits sometimes with some structure. And then you go ahead and you have that refreshing mouthfeel, from as if it were a white wine. And you have those together with a rosé wine. as well as you've seen, the different aromatic complexities that you can have. So these wines can go with anything from sushi to ceviche. You can do it with grilled fish, like a tuna steak. You can have it with, grilled chicken. You can even, I think these wines are terrific, if even with, other meats. So I think these wines can be explored across the table. I mean, imagine some of the wines where you have that structure and you've got that rich body and that intensity. Those wines are going to pair well, with richer meals. A big pasta dinner with a creamy sauce is going to go so well, with a rosé wine. And because the Vin de Provence wines have that structure and that weight and have that beauty, really, I think it's unstoppable, with what it can go with. And in fact, we eat today, world cuisines. One night we could be having a Mexican burrito, and the next night we're eating Asian, curry. And rosé wines, I can attest to this personally, go with both of those so well. So you've got the, spices in the curry, and you've got this, this freshness of the rosé that can counter that, but at the same time, it can sit up, to what's, whether it's beef or veggies, in that burrito. So I just feel like the pairings are endless here. And then, hey, the way that we eat sometimes today is lots of small plates. And those small plates can have many different flavors and textures. So once again, rosé, which isn't going to get in the way like some of, the more tannic red wines can sometimes not work as well with some of the food items. You don't have that issue with rosé. However, rosé has these Vin de Provence rosés have enough stuffing that they're gastronomic rosés. You really can serve them with a main meal, right? Especially these wines there are some wines out there that have a little oak influence, but they have that weight, they have that richness. They go ahead and have some of that structure. So if you go ahead, I think this should be put to the test. If you even put a steak on the grill and pair it with one of the more richer style, maybe one of those Côtes de Provence Lalande wines, then you're going to have a great pairing there because it can match up to that steak. And aged rosés is something we can't ignore. I mean, people think about rosé as, you drink it fresh and young, and yes, it's delicious that way. However, there's been a lot of testing on that as well. And, here, the Centre de Rosé actually created, for those of you who love geeky charts, they created this aromatic wheel, which shows the progression, the development of flavors that happens in the Vin de Provence as they develop. The circle on the outer, talks about the progression of the color. And then the next circle in is your aromas. And then you go ahead and the texture of the wine. All of this changes with time. This very first half, the right hand side of the chart, is talking about even the development within the first year and what can happen. And you're already going to see as the wine ages, there's a little added richness. Well, that only gets richer, more texture in ages, 2 to 5, and then even beyond. So these are wines that actually can be, fully enjoyed when they're aged. So something for us to rethink about in the marketplace. Now, we've been talking about all these beautiful colors, right? One of the other charts that I want to leave you with, is this chart created by the Centre de Rosé, which shows the different colors. They've worked hard on this, looking hard at the colors. They have a big palette of colors. These are the main 6 colors. We talked about, hey, we've got the mother of pearl here on the right, lychee, peach, pomelo, melon, apricot, all of these colors you can find in the wine. I think this is a great point to sort of sum up, what we've been talking about. First, I think we answered the question, our initial question, are all Provence rosés the same? I think that's a big no, from what we've seen in these wines today. But yet, we have this core, of offerings from the wines that I think is our sort of elevator speech about the wines. They're dry, pale color, but that color belies the fact that there is some great intensity in the aromatic, aromas that you can find in the wines. So aromatic intensity and complexity that you can find in the wines. And then there's that beautiful roundness, that suppleness on the palate. Take that with the fact that there's this beautiful acidity that lifts that fruit, and there's a beautiful fresh finish. So all of that is what you get in a glass of vin de Provence. Yet, I think as we explored today, you're getting different expressions of that, right? Some are more maybe fresh versus supple. Some are more, have different aromatic, maybe more red fruits versus more citrus fruits. There's differences in the wines that provides the explorer, those who love to taste different wines and explore nuances. There's plenty here to unwrap. So let's go ahead and find out if there's any questions.
Catherine, there are. So the first one, on the Chateau de la Clapière slide, it mentioned that it's a cru classé. Could you speak to
Yes.
the cru classé part of the wine?
Yeah, yes, happy to drive it on home. So the Cru Classé is a classification that was done in 1955. And so this classification was for estates. And there's some odd 18 estates, that were given this classification. That is very different than the cru that I mentioned earlier, right? The Côtes de Provence Saint Victoire cru, that is, the very first cru of Provence, very proud of it. And that is regarding the terroir, showing that unique terroir. So the two coexist. One is cru classé, classification of the estate, and then cru name, that new one with the first, that is for the terroir.
Great. So, a lot of people tuning in today, they already sell a fair bit of rosé, but so often it's US rosé. We're in the US. So US rosé, particularly California rosé. So, particularly when you're talking to customers, what are the selling points for these Provence wines over American rosé?
Yeah. No, great question. I think that with the Vin de Provence, you know the style that you're going to get, right? That style that I just explained. It's going to be a dry wine. It's going to be pale in color. It's going to have intensity, yet freshness and richness on the palate. All of those things you can expect to varying degrees, because we've talked about the fact that there is diversity and variety here. But all of those things you can be assured to get in a Vin de Provence. However, with wines of, say, California, you're not quite sure, right? Because there's less restrictions in the United States on what you can do, how many different grape varieties you can use, the processes you do in the vineyard and the cellar, less restrictions. And the wine might be sweet. It might be a white Zinfandel and have sweetness in it. It could be even versus a non-California wine. If it's some of the most famous of the Loire rosé are like Cabernet d'Anjou are sweet. But with the Vin de Provence, you can expect a dry wine where you can't necessarily expect that in other places. So I think that you really do you have something that you can give to a customer and know it, what style they're generally going to get. And I think there's power in that. I think because the customer will come back happy, like, yes, I love that style. And you can give them any Vin de Provence rosé and they're going to get that same thing, unless they really want to dive in and you're like, okay, do you love juiciness, that freshness? Do you love acidity in a wine? Okay, try this one. It happens to have, you can talk about the Côtes de Provence en Provence. if you have a wine that has, that PDO on the label, or if you happen to have a wine that has the DGC, the Côtes de Provence, Saint Victoire, then you can say, okay, now try these, because these are at elevation and you've got this great freshness. I just feel like you can tell them that general elevator speech of what the Vin de Provence Rosé is going to give you, because it gives you that. But then if they want to explore some nuances, they're absolutely available.
And then I think we've got time for one more. So it is a tasting question.
Mhm.
How can we distinguish Provence from other regions?
Okay. So like that California question. So it's like comparing wines, and I love that. I think that this, maybe if we compare it to a few of the other French rosés, you have, like I said, beautiful wines in the Loire, but you have like Cabernet d'Anjou, Rosé d'Anjou. Those have some sweetness to them. Um, and you have, Tavel, deeper, darker, colored wine. If you have the dry wines from the Loire or Bordeaux rosé, those wines tend to me, they have their own attributes and wonderful things about them. But the difference for me is that there's that greater suppleness. There's that richness on the palate, with a Vin de Provence rosé that can be counted on. Um, and so I just feel like that defines the style versus these other wines that where the climate's different. It just doesn't have that same suppleness.
I suppose just to expand on that question, there are some regions that do try to emulate the Provence style, like you sort of hear about it, like we're trying to make what Provence does. So if they are trying to emulate the Provence style, how would you go about tasting the differences there?
That is such a great question because, right at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about, hey, producers from around the world will call their wines Provence style if they're pale in color, but that's not. I hope that that became clear after this session. That is only one of the aspects of the style of the Vin de Provence Rosé. So you have, again, that sort of that concise description of the wines. What you're going to get with the Vin de Provence Rosé, besides just a pale color, is that richness balanced by freshness and that intensity, that aromatic intensity and complexity. So I think that's, sort of pinpoints, those wines. But I don't know if I've explained enough, or if they want to. What exactly? How did they phrase the question?
I think it's really for blind tasting. And so if you've got, sort of that Provence style rosé in
Hmm.
front of you,
Hmm.
I suppose sometimes it could be other things. And so
Okay. Yes. Yes. So producers who say, a lot of the producers out there, like we just took some students, the Academy just took some students to Portugal, and we were in the Douro tasting rosé wines, and the winemakers were calling their wines Provence style, because they had paler colored rosés, but the wines did not have. So in a blind tasting, one of the things still is that texture. I think that sets these wines apart, where that same suppleness, that same richness is not in the wines exactly. Of course, there's always exceptions, but I don't find that same thing in the wines of Bordeaux or the dry wines of the Loire, or, so many different wines. So the texture for me would have the wine stand out. And then for some, if I saw that complexity, if I saw that, hey, there was these, red fruits along with these white fruits, and there was, start to be thinking, ooh, do I have a blend here? Okay, where do they make, blends? In California, you may have blends, but they're blends, from the Vin de Provence. So, that could be another aspect that you're looking for. So pulling out whether you think that it's a blend or not only looking at the color, but looking at the texture on your palate, I think is going to be really important.
that's excellent, Catherine. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. This was great fun. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. I know your time is valuable. Hopefully, you don't have to get right back to work and you can finish tasting your rosés.